So in this video, what I'm going to be doing is going through the uses of completing the square, focusing on turning points, vertexes, stationary points, maximum coordinates, reflection lines, and all useful things. Now, hopefully you are able to factorize a quadratic equation in the form of completing the square. So either be in this form here, where your coefficient of x squared is going to be 1, or it's going to be in this form here, where your coefficient of x squared was originally not equal to 1. So what I'm going to go through is, now one of the common questions that you usually get asked at an exam question or in a textbook question is, once you've got in this format, is to find the turning point, maximum minimum point, or stationary point or vertex of the quadratic equation when it's plotted. Now it could be given either one of these things. So with regards to its turning point, so if I just quickly do a little sketch of a quadratic, so just ignore the lack of straight lines, always worthy of labelling your axes. So if I was to draw a quadratic curve, so here we've got a positive parabola, so this point here would be my minimum point, and it also can be classed as the vertex. It can also be classed as a stationary point, because at that point there the gradient is 0. We'll look at this more in detail, we'll look at differentiation, but at this, with regards to looking at completing a square, it would be classed as a stationary point or a vertex or a turning point. And obviously if we had a negative parabola, in which, if I just get rid of all of that, so if I was to have a negative parabola, so it would look something like that, then here I'd be looking at a maximum point, but it will still be classed as a turning point or a vertex or a stationary point. So once we've got it in our format of completing the square, regardless of which format it is in, how we establish what information the A and B values give us, which is basically the two values that you've already worked out, is that, bear with me to change the colour of pen. So what we've got is, to find the turning point coordinate, then our coordinate would be minus A and then whatever your B value is going to be. So here your minus A, now sometimes when you've got a negative A value, so for example if I had this, then the x ordinate will be the value of x that makes this bracket equal to 0. So in this case the value of x that will make this bracket equal to 0 would be 3, and the y ordinate would be whatever the constant is, including the sign there, would be your y ordinate. So here for this particular example my turning point would be 3, 4. Now using my common sense, I know that this is going to produce a positive x squared, so this would look like a U shape, so this would be a minimum point. If I had, let's say, a minus x, let's say plus 5 squared minus 3, in this format, again I'll be looking at, well, if I was to expand this out, it would produce a negative parabola, so therefore I'm looking for a maximum point, and the coordinate would be of the value of x that makes the bracket equal to 0, which would be minus 5. So even though there is a negative outside the bracket, it does not make a difference to the format of this, and my constant there is minus 3, so this would be my maximum point. Now moving on to the reflection line, well, that kind of makes sense if I put it in a diagram. So if you just bear with me. So if we were to draw a diagram again, and let's go back. Now with a parabola, they are symmetrical about that turning point. So at this point here, my reflection line, if I was using a ruler, would actually be there. Now how we actually calculate that without actually having to draw it out is simply going to be, well, all reflection lines on a parabola will always be a vertical line, so therefore the equation of that line is going to be x equals, and then whatever your x ordinate is going to be, which in this case is going to be minus a. So if I had an equation that looked like this, then the minimum point, the reflection line, lost track of what we were doing, the reflection line would be at x equals 5, because that's the value of x that makes it equal to 0. If I had x plus 3 squared minus 4, then the reflection line for this would be x equals minus 3. And if I had, let's say, something like that, then the reflection line would still be, even though I've got a number there, would still be at a half. So as you can see, in terms of the reflection line, it will be x equals, and then the value of x that makes that bracket equal to 0, regardless of which format it's going to be. The next thing we move on to, which we've already kind of discussed, is the max and minimum value. The maximum and minimum value. Now this sounds very, very similar to the max and minimum coordinate, but actually there is a difference to it. Now, the max and minimum value is the highest or the lowest y ordinate you can get. So for example, if I should really have this just fixed. So for example, if I had a parabola, then the smallest y value, because it's a minimum, it's a positive parabola, so it's going to produce a minimum point. So the minimum value is going to be at this point here. So that is going to be my minimum value that the quadratic could take. If I was to have a positive parabola, then I would be looking at a maximum value. So this would be the maximum value that the quadratic could give me. So here the maximum value is going to be just whatever your constant is. So that, if I just get rid of the plus, because b might not always be positive, is just going to be your b value. So as an example, if I just get rid of all of this, which I know I'm going to have to draw again. So for example, if I had x plus 4 squared minus 13, then the minimum value, because obviously it's going to produce a positive parabola, is going to be minus 13. If I had minus x minus 3/4 plus 10, then this would produce a negative parabola, which would produce a maximum value. So the max value is going to be, in this case, positive 10. Now, the next part we then move on to is, well, what is the value of x that gives you that max or minimum value? Well, that simply is going to be your minus a. So in other words, minus a is the value of x. So if I just write it down, so minus a is the value of x that makes the bracket equal to 0. So that's how we can find out the value of x. So if you get any of these questions, they're usually going to be worth 1 mark, because it is simply just reading it off the equation or the answer that you've done when you've completed the square. But hopefully that makes a little bit of sense in terms of what these things are actually asking you to do, and also how to find them.